Thank you for the folks that are joining us. I'm going to give a few minutes because it's not quite 4 o'clock just yet to get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today. I'm Laura Spears, and I am the Transition Services Coordinator with the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department. So I'm excited to share some information with you today that I think may be beneficial to you in serving the students that you provide services to, and wanted to make sure that you're aware of some of the things that are available out in your community. So I'm going to give it just another minute, and then we'll get started, just in case we've got some folks that are joining at last minute. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm Laura Spears. I'm the Transition Services Coordinator with South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department. And I thank you for joining this webinar, which, as you'll see on your computer, that's made possible through a collaborative grant with Department of Education, Office of Special Education Services, and the University of South Carolina Southeastern Behavioral Health Community. I was very honored to be asked to provide some information today on the webinar. You're not going to see my face, and you'll probably be thankful for that. So you're going to just get to look at my PowerPoint slides as I walk you through the information that I want to share. So with my job with vocational rehabilitation, we have counselors assigned to every high school in South Carolina who are tasked with providing services to students with disabilities. And our goal is to help them explore their opportunities once they leave high school, whether they're going straight to work or they're going maybe on to some post-secondary training opportunities. So our job is to help them make sure that they're on the right track and they know everything that's out there available for them. But what I'm talking about today are what we call pre-employment transition services. And so on here, we're going to talk about the what, the why, the who, the where, and the when of these particular services. So these services are intended to ensure that students have access to the career planning. Again, as I just mentioned before, whether they're going straight into employment or maybe looking at some post-secondary training opportunities. So when I say pre-employment transition services, the services that are covered under that, there's 5 core services. Job exploration counseling, which is just what it says, you know, making sure that students know what specific jobs are out there based on what they're interested in. looking at what high demand jobs are in their area, making sure that if they have a job in mind, that it's going to be something that they can do in their area, or if not, then they're willing to maybe look at moving eventually to be able to do those jobs. Work-based learning experiences, which can be job shadows, actual hands-on job tryouts, internships, anything that will expose those students to the experiences within a setting that they may be interested in. I usually look at work-based learning experiences in two ways. One, it can really teach a student about the world of work, just exposes them to what it is, what it's like to go to work, and what does an employer expect from them when they're on the job, and then also exploring those careers that they're interested in. We know that students who engage in work-based learning experiences before they leave school are five times more likely to work once they leave school. Counseling on enrollment in post-secondary training opportunities. Again, making sure they know what training is available that's related to the actual job they want to get into. It may not require a 4-year degree. It may not even require a 2-year degree. It could be one of the quick jobs or some other setting that isn't quite so long-term. So helping them to understand those opportunities that are available. And then once they're involved in those opportunities, what services are available to them, such as disability services within a college setting. Workplace readiness training, that is basically your soft skills, things that are going to help a student to be much more successful in the workplace, resolving conflict, decision making, even things like financial literacy to help them to understand how to manage their money. And then finally, instruction in self-advocacy, making sure that their self-awareness, how do they explain to an employer what benefits they bring to the table? So truly being able to not only speak up for yourself, but to be able to share what your real strengths are with other folks. And again, and it is a lot of speaking up for yourself. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that was signed into law in 2014 requires vocational rehabilitation agencies to set aside at least 15% of our federal funds to provide these services. So in South Carolina, you have 2 vocational rehabilitation agencies, the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department and the Commission for the Blind. So we are both state vocational rehabilitation agencies. So when we talk about VR, I'm also talking about the Commission for the Blind as well. So in providing these services, we have this funding now to make sure that we're providing the services, and they want to make sure that these services are available to all students with the disabilities. So when I'm talking about providing these services, it's not just for students that are currently enrolled with vocational rehabilitation services. These can be applied to any student with a disability. So again, who receives the pre-employment transition services? So again, like I said, students with disabilities. They're enrolled in a secondary, post-secondary, or other recognized education program such as adult education or a DJJ-affiliated education program. They're not younger than the earliest age for the provision of transition services under IDEA. And of course, we know in South Carolina, those transition services start at age 13 and not older than 21. So we look at any student with a disability ages 13 to 21 that is enrolled in a educational system. So who provides the pre-employment transition services? As I said, the VR agencies are mandated to provide these services. Right now, our counselors, and we have some other staff that are in the schools and working with our partners, and they can provide these pre-employment transition services to the students. We've been actually doing this for quite a while prior to this law even being signed in to law. So it's been nice that we've actually had the partnerships with the schools, and we've been providing these services to students. School districts So we're working with some school districts. Currently, we have some agreements with school districts around the state where maybe we are helping to fund someone in their district to provide pre-employment transition services. So we have a couple of those around the state. So we're looking at counties that maybe the students there aren't getting access to as many of the services as students in a larger county may benefit from. So we're working with the school districts to provide, making sure that all of their students have access to those services. And then our community partners. So working with, for example, Able, South Carolina does a lot of pre-employment transition services. And so we partner with them. The Commission for the Blind actually started with Career Boost and had Able, South Carolina, Walton Options, and Walton also had Accessibility. And these folks provide these pre-employment transition services in the schools. And we're now currently working with these organizations to make sure. So there's a lot of folks out there doing pre-employment transition services, and our goal is to try to work together so we're not duplicating services, but it just allows us to have a broader outreach to make sure that we're serving all of the students. So where are these offered? Obviously in the school. We're in the school, we're providing instruction on any of these areas that the students can benefit from. Going out into the community, working with employers and seeing about, again, having some of those workplace readiness skills, those work-based learning opportunities, so out in the community, and really any of our agency partners. So it's not tied to just for students that are in a high school brick and mortar. So these can be any students, again, like I said, in an educational setting. And then when are they offered? Like I said, we want to start as early as age 13. Now, our counselors for vocational rehab are typically not in the high schools and working with students ages 13. So there are some ways to be able to reach out to those populations. And again, that's where some of our partners, such as Able, and some of our other partners are actually doing some things specifically with middle school students. So when I look at those services with pre-employment transition services, again, these are not just for vocational rehabilitation students. So these are for all students with disabilities. As we start to work with these students and identify those that can benefit from vocational rehabilitation services, then we can enroll them and get them eligible and be able to provide what we then call more transition services. So these services with the pre-employment is to really get these students exposed to those careers, get them to start thinking about career awareness, providing some skills that when they do make that decision, they do want to go to work, they're going to have some good background and some good skills to be able to start that process. And I have a couple of resources here. So the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, WINTAC, has some really, really good information on their website. They really explain pre-employment transition services quite well. That's my go-to for everything that I need to know about pre-employment transition services. And then, of course, our website has information that you can access as well as far as those particular services. So again, like I said, these pre-employment transition services, how schools can make sure that their students are getting these particular services is reaching out to your local area offices. So on the Vocational Rehabilitation website, you'll find a list of all the offices. But again, we have counselors in the schools, so hopefully the school district folks are familiar with who their vocational rehabilitation counselor is. So working with those folks to make sure that these students are accessing these particular services out there. I'm doing some work right now with some of our virtual charter schools virtual schools, and also some of the homeschool associations to make sure that those students are also getting exposed to these pre-employment transition services as well. Like I said, it's not just VR that's providing them. We have a whole host of folks out there providing these services. And again, to receive these services, a student doesn't have to enroll in our agency for those services, but we can at some point in time determine that if they're going to go to work, would they need some more services such as job coaching? Are they going to require those supported employment services once they obtain a job? Are they looking at post-secondary training? That's something that vocational rehabilitation could provide assistance with. If they require assistive technology devices, again, that might be something that vocational rehabilitation could provide assistance with. And all of those are services outside of the pre-employment transition services realm. So we would then want to make sure that we're linking those students with our services so they can have access to those things in addition to the pre-employment transition services. That's kind of the down and dirty with our pre-employment transition services. Right now, at this point, I think it may be a good opportunity to take some questions. I went a whole lot faster than I thought I would. So please ask some questions if you've got some. Either I did a really good job and you all don't have any questions, but I wanted to make sure you all knew how to access these services. Again, like I said, because they're not just for vocational rehabilitation students. Okay, so Maddie has a question about the services for parents as well. We do, it's funny when I present at a lot of conferences about our transition services, our agency does provide services we can start at age 14 and we go all the way up to, adulthood. So if you're working with some students and you know that their parents could benefit from our services, absolutely, you can still contact that vocational rehabilitation office and we can see about providing services for the parents as well. And Tricia asked, are these services for all students enrolled in special education classes? One of the criteria that we're looking at for the federal requirements is that a student has either an IEP, a 504, or they have a disability but maybe doesn't require any of those particular services. So it could be a student, for example, with cerebral palsy who does not require a 504 or an IEP. So really any student with a disability. If it is a student with blindness, we will refer them to the Commission for the Blind because we serve pretty much every disability except for blindness. So, so the job exploration opportunities, Tristan, these are things like just job shadows. There's a lot of neat stuff on the internet as far as virtual job shadows. Microburst Learning has some really good opportunities on there. It's kind of an interactive virtual job shadow for students to be able to get on and learn about particular jobs and not just what did they do on the job, but what kind of classes should they be taking in high school to prepare them. What do the hours look like for this job? What does the pay look like? What does a typical day look like? So they can access all of that information. So we try to expose them to job market information. So if I want to be a video game designer and I'm in Allendale, South Carolina, we know those opportunities are probably not readily available in that area. So helping them to explore what are some of those opportunities in their area. Again, and I really just think the job shadowing is key when they can actually see it for themselves. So some of the services, Rebecca, that I would like to see added in the future, as far as pre-employment right now, I think we've got that covered. I think if students receive instruction in all 5 of these areas, they're going to be very well grounded and really ready, I think, for whatever it is that they want to pursue. So Beverly is asking, once the youth or young adult has transitioned to college, yes, they will have access to VR. One of the things with a student going on to post-secondary training, we want to follow them through until they get employment. So when we actually have a VR case, we do not want to close that case until someone has been employed for at least 90 days successfully, and that means stable on the job. So for our folks that go off to college, while they may not need us to actually place them on jobs as much, they have the skills to be able to get their own jobs, we still want to make sure that they have access to any supports that they may still need. So we would definitely still follow them until they become employed. And great question for the services available to students with hearing loss. We actually have counselors in each of our area offices who are what we call counselors to provide services for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. So we have a counselor in each office, but we also have a specialist in our consumer services department, and she heads up our deaf and hard of hearing services. And so she is making sure that those students out there have access to all of our services. She's very involved with committees out in the state that target that population specifically. So we definitely have those services available to them. So she is working hard on that. Her name is Kathy Stair. The VR person, Beverly, to follow the person from high school to college, I think that's going to depend on a lot of factors. Sometimes it depends on how big that counselor's caseload is. So if I am a transition counselor and I'm working with students in high school, if I keep particular students for too long, my caseload becomes too big and I can't allow students to rotate on and off. So it's really depending on what that student needs. For the most part, many of our offices do generally keep those same folks, but it really may depend on the office structure and then really what that student needs. So can students seek help only during the school year? No, these are all year round. So often in the summer, our students, each of our area offices does what we call summer institutes, because we know that when the students aren't in school, they forget about us. So we want to keep them in the loop and familiar with who we are outside of the school building. Because I've had a lot of students, once they finish school, they think they're finished with VR. And we're actually in it to make sure that they're transitioning from high school to whatever their next step is successfully. So really, I think that's the major key, is they're not getting those supports that they've had in high school. So we actually want to follow them through. So by having them participate in some of our summer activities, they see us outside of that school and then can realize that we can provide those services to them once they're finished. So we do a lot of those activities throughout the summer. So Tricia, with how does a student connect with the VR counselor? You could contact that area office and find out who the counselor is that serves that school, and we can make sure that that counselor reaches out to that person. So a student or parent initiated, it's really open. A parent can obviously call and refer their child. A teacher can refer children, and of course the students themselves can apply for services as well. For students under the age of 18, we do have to have parental involvement. There are certain documents that the parent must sign. by law. So, so we do try to get those parents engaged from the very beginning. So often if a school personnel tells me they've got somebody they think could benefit from vocational rehab, the first thing I usually do is reach out to the parents and explain who I am and what services it is that I can provide. We obviously want that parental support throughout the process because we have to meet their needs as well. And so with the VR engaging with the middle school students, Melissa, as I said, our counselors don't typically go into the middle schools. We are looking at some positions that we're hoping to be able to post and fill soon, and these would be for what we call a pre-employment specialist, and that's what their job would be, is to do nothing but provide these services. So whether it is a VR position, internal position providing these, or a school position providing these, that's how we're going to be able to reach those middle school students. And what services are available to young adults with epilepsy in Chester or Fairfield counties? Okay, so Chester is served out of our Rock Hill area office. We do have a counselor that goes to Chester, and then Fairfield is served out of our Camden office, and we actually have a counselor that goes over to Fairfield. So we do have counselors that service those areas. So we can definitely work with those particular individuals. So again, it's like I said, it's all disabilities. So whether it is a physical disability, an emotional or mental health related disability, a learning disability, again, we service every disability with the exception of blindness, and we work closely with our sister agency, the Commission for the Blind, to be able to provide those services. And I will give you all my my direct contact information. If you want to reach out to me, give me a call. My number is 803-896-6574. And my email is lspears, S-P-E-A-R-S, at C as in cat, V as in Victor, RD as in dog, .net. And I will be glad to answer any questions that you have so we can make sure that you're getting the folks that you need to get linked up with our services. Great questions, y'all. I really appreciate that. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to give it another minute. Our counselors are always willing to go out and do presentations with folks in their community to make sure, you know, everyone always says, well, I didn't know that you all did all that. And we've been around a long time, but, you know, the only way to really get out there and let folks know what we do is to be visible in the community and to let folks know what it is that we do. So with the Transition Alliance of South Carolina, you know, there are interagency teams around the state, and VR is at the table with those interagency teams as we provide things like transition-related fairs, resource fairs to families to let them know what's out there, so keep your eye out for those. I've got a question from Beverly. So how do parents stay in the loop once that child has transitioned to work or college? Yeah, they have a hard time getting information from their youth. You're right. Those youth don't really like to share much of that information. So once a student reaches the age of majority, you know, I think it just depends on what that student is allowing us to share. I worked with many students and they were great with me talking to mom or dad and keeping them in the loop, especially if they still lived at home and they were looking at work and they needed to depend on the family for transportation. I obviously wouldn't want to help get them a job that they weren't going to be able to get to. So there are some things that necessitate that communication with the families and making sure that we are keeping them in the loop. But we do try to keep them involved with all of those aspects. And then when they're in school, post-secondary training, if there's some financial assistance that vocational rehabilitation is providing, we usually have to keep those parents in the loop with that as well, because we're going to often depend on them to apply for the FAFSA and getting information to look at that financial need from them. And I think it really helps too when we start off with, especially some of our students, getting the parents involved at the very get-go. Then they just get to know us better, and the follow-up is much easier. So hopefully that answered everything you needed, Beverly. And Tristan, I am reading yours. An interface for students with disabilities to communicate or have an advocate communicate to an employer their limitations and perhaps specific things to avoid. If that would be up to the particular student, so that's kind of covered under that self-advocacy instruction, what to disclose with an employer. If it's obviously not going to be a barrier or cause any issues on a job, it wouldn't be of concern. But we deal a lot with this, in particular with students maybe with autism that may have some sensitivity to particular sounds, or so we're obviously going to try to put them in a setting that's going to be the best fit for them. But there may be times when we do work with the employer on recognizing some of the things that they need to take into account. And again, we're so lucky to have partner agencies such as ABLE, and they do a really good job of working with students on disclosing that information. What I like about them is the peer-to-peer contact. So one peer can share with another how they handle those particular situations. Me as an adult, they may not respond to as well, but once they talk to another young adult and they get to hear how they handle particular things. So if it's something that we can't address ourselves, we're going to make sure that we link them with these resources that we've been fortunate enough to become familiar with in our community. Man, y'all are asking good questions. I appreciate this. All right, again, my phone number was 803-896-6574. Please feel free to reach out to me. And again, my email is lspears, S-P-E-A-R-S, @scbrd.net. So I welcome you to contact me anytime. I can point you in the right direction and link you with folks in your community to make sure that these students are getting the services that they need, or adults. Okay, Beverly, let's see, you're asking about the rural areas for families, and transportation is an issue. I wish I really had a magic wand to fix that issue. Unfortunately, it's been very tough. So we don't actually provide the transportation, but we can, if I have someone who is going to work or needs to participate in our services and they have to pay someone else, we can provide some initial funding to get them so they can pay until they can start earning their own wages and be able to pay that themselves. But unfortunately, that's a battle that I think a lot of us face. So in these really rural areas and trying to get students or families, even adults, to where they need to get. So the assistance that we can provide is limited in that it is financial, and again, for a time-limited amount of time. All right, I'm scanning through one more time and I don't see any more questions. Like I said, please feel free to reach out to me. Anything I can answer for you or make sure I get you linked with the right resources, I'll be glad to do so. And I know that this is being taped, so if you've got someone who was unable to attend today, it will be archived. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining and listening to me today. I really appreciate your participation. And like I said, keep me in mind if you have any questions. All right, everyone, have a wonderful afternoon.